Education.
Thank you, sir. I'm very pleased to rise to speak on the Electoral Miscellaneous Amendment Bill, and I congratulate the Attorney-General on bringing it to this parliament, because it does a number of things that are very important in ensuring that the will of the South Australian populace be reflected, if this bill is passed, in the composition of the parliament, the make-up of the government who serves those people. There are a number of principal matters at stake, and I want to focus on the principles because the purpose of our parliament is to govern for the best interests of all South Australians. One would hope that it would also be a widely understood and accepted idea that that government should be determined by the will of the South Australian people. We know that for a number of elections, the government, the make-up of the parliament, the composition of the parliament did not necessarily reflect the majority view as expressed in a compulsory preferential system as advocated for by those opposite. The Shadow Minister in particular suggested that the backroom deals that are done in preference negotiations in marginal seats that he identified and ran through was instead a better way to do it. And for the party that brought us the put your family first, disgraceful attack on the electoral system, designed by the member for Playford, who was State Secretary of the Labor Party at the time.
Minister, take your seat. I can feel a point of order coming.
Standing orders are suspended. You're allowed to sit in.
Yeah, well, actually, Attorney, that's a very good point. Although we are under COVID arrangements, so
Thank you, Mr.
I'm not sure how that reflects. Member for Playford.
I asked the minister to withdraw that disgraceful, incorrect statement. I need advice from you, mate.
Which statement is allegedly incorrect, and then I will assist the House if necessary.
Member for Playford.
I asked the minister to withdraw that remark that I was the architect of a scheme designed to subvert democracy.
Okay. Look, for the sake of the late afternoon's debate, Minister, it might be best you withdraw that. You've obviously offended.
I withdraw the language that I used.
Minister, I haven't quite finished yet. So thank you for withdrawing that. You've obviously offended the member for Playford. But I do also ask the member for Playford and the member for Ghana to listen carefully and intently and quietly to the minister's contribution, as those in the government benches did for you, the member for Ghana. Minister.
Thank you, sir. I withdraw the language that I used before and instead suggest that perhaps I could use an anecdote from history and real life to demonstrate some of the value of one of the propositions in this bill, that being the optional preferential system that is proposed. The 2010 election, which many members would be familiar and some might remember, was an election where the Put Your Family First proposal was adopted by the Labor Party on election day. This was a how-to-vote card distributed by Labor Party members and other volunteers in 4 seats, including the seat of Morialta, where Labor Party volunteers, purporting to operate with an organisation connected to the then Family First political party, which was, of course, suggesting preferences to the Liberal Party in those seats. These Labor Party volunteers, wearing Put Your Family First T-shirts, handing out flyers that said Put Your Family First, were designed clearly to encourage voters who might be attached to the Family First party to indeed express an order of preferences that was different to that which the Family First party was suggesting. Why does any party have these how-to-vote cards? Because it is a critically important and understood fact of our democracy that we want everyone's vote to be counted. We want people to vote for our parties, but to have their votes counted in South Australia, they must number every box. And so, therefore, parties have this how-to-vote card so that their supporters might be assisted, particularly those with any issues with their literacy or any issues with the English language, so that their supporters might be encouraged to understand how to correctly fill in a valid vote, a vote that will be counted for the propositions that are put forward by the party they connect with. The purpose of the Labor Party organising Labor Party members and Labor Party volunteers to assist handing out how-to-votes that said vote 1 for the Family First candidate and then prioritise the Labor candidate above the Liberal candidate in whichever seat I would position could only be to encourage those voters who wanted to support Family First to indeed support candidates who were not endorsed by Family First, in this case being the Labor candidates in what were identified as marginal seats. The member for Playford has an interesting role to play here, of course, because if memory serves me right, I think his name was on that how to vote card in authorising the how to vote card. Indeed, it was a defence used by the Labor Party that anybody who was allegedly misled by this how to vote card should have known better, because forgetting that the Family First name of a political party was up there big in at least 72, maybe 132-point font. The member for Playford may correct me. He might have been the one doing the desktop publishing. The fact is that
Order.
The minister
Yes.
to withdraw that remark.
Yep. Minister.
Oh, how smart!
Order. Minister for Skills and Innovation. That was an interjection, and I did hear it, and I will ask you to withdraw it. No, don't do that, Minister. Just withdraw. Thank you. Now, Minister, before I give you the call again, Minister, I'm going to bring the House to order. I know emotions are running high. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you, sir. So, the Labor Party, in producing this flyer, which was authorised by the Labor Party State Secretary at the time, the now member for Playford, put in large font, 132, 172, we haven't quite got clarification, but it was very large, Family First, such as...
The member for Playford is called to order. I don't know how many times that is today, member, but take heed.
Such as any reasonable observer, I would suggest, would think that it was a Family First how to vote card, and I would put that that was the design. The second political party that was identified...
There's a point of order.
Ask the minister to withdraw that remark that the idea was to mislead voters.
Sir, I was not making illusions about any member of Parliament.
No, that's true, Minister, and I'm not going to uphold that point of order. But look, I ask members again. I know people are passionate about this, and ultimately we're discussing behaviour and what's allowable in the lead up to and on election day, and that brings out passions. But I do remind members that the minister can be heard in silence. Minister.
Thank you, sir. So, at the very least, we have Labor Party members and Labor Party volunteers and supporters handing out a flyer authorised by the Labor Party, where the Australian Labor Party was written at the bottom in, I believe, 8-point font. It could have been 10-point font. Was it 6? Whatever the law says is the response. I take that on. Whatever the minimum is the law says, and my recollection is that is 8-point font. And Family First, the name of another political party, were in big words underneath the words put your family first, in 172-point font perhaps, 20 times larger. Now, I leave it to any reasonable member of Parliament, any reasonable member of the community to suggest to me that that was indeed a flyer designed to be open and transparent about its support for the Labor Party. I remain to be convinced. And you know who else wasn't convinced? Anyone in the Labor caucus between 2010 and 2014, because indeed the former government was so embarrassed by their behaviour that they brought a bill to the Parliament to make it illegal to do something like that again. That is the behaviour that was authorised by the member for Playford when he was the State Secretary of the Labor Party, to authorise and to presumably therefore take responsibility for the publication, dissemination of a flyer on election day, which was subsequently effectively outlawed by this House based on a bill brought by the former Labor government because they were so embarrassed by their own conduct. Now, the reason that the Labor Party did that, I would put, was to take advantage of preferences in the way that they are required to be done under the compulsory preferential system. And they were enabled to do so. The benefit of an optional preferential system is that the purpose of saving a vote the purpose of enabling every voter's wish to be reflected in the ballot box, counted for the candidate they support, will be maximised because it will be indeed much easier for any elector to express their preference, because they won't need to follow a how to vote card. They won't need to choose between candidates that are lower down that they potentially don't prefer, that they can then cast their vote. They can cast their vote in order, in preferential order, for all candidates. They can cast their vote in preferential order for some candidates and then not choose between the last couple of candidates. They can cast their vote for a smaller number of candidates in the order of their preference, up to the point where they no longer have a preference between those that are remaining on the ballot paper. It is a perfect summary of how we can give choice back to voters about how they express their electoral will through the ballot box. And on a point of principle, I would advocate that in a compulsory voting system, as we have, the opportunity for a voter to say, you know what, I don't care whether you're in the Labor Party or the Greens, I don't want to choose between either of you. Or I don't care whether you're in the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party, I don't want to choose between either of you. I'm voting 1 Green, I'm voting 2 Labor, I'm voting 3 for Nick Xenophon team or SA Best or Advance, any of the other parties that are in the system, and then choose not to vote for the Liberal Party or any other candidate under that. Now, the fact is that optional preferential voting gives that power to every voter. And for those voters who have identified only 1 or 2 people who they want to support, it gives them that power too, and reduces the possibility of their vote being counted as invalid because they haven't successfully identified filling in all of the boxes. The Labor Party doesn't have a principal objection to this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have introduced legislation before the last election to have optional preferential voting in the upper house. The Labor Party's objection to this is that they fear that it will damage them electorally. Now, the member for Florey identified that, in fact, one of the greatest proponents to electoral benefit of the optional preferential voting system was indeed a Labor Premier in Queensland called Peter Beattie. Now, it was the Labor Party that determined that they would use the system to say just vote one in their campaign materials. And the fact is that in that circumstance, the Labor Party did well, the Liberal Party did very, very badly. I've got a feeling they may have only got a handful or less of members in that election. The National Party did pretty badly, and the One Nation Party, who were, I think, one of the major opposition parties at the time, probably did less well than Labor. But the fact is, sometimes it will help Liberal, sometimes it will help Labor. We should be basing an electoral system on what is the best possible opportunity for people in our community to have the expression of their will reflected in the ballot box in the composition of this parliament. And the member for Ghana interjected that it will hurt independence, or words to that effect. The member for Florey suggested as much in her comments. I challenged them on this claim. I think it's nonsense. I think that where you have somebody who is capable of being elected to Parliament as an independent, because without the infrastructure of a political party, the community's respect and regard for them is so significant that they are capable of winning an election in a compulsory preferential system, in many ways will be benefited from not having the community having to fill out every vote. Somebody like the member for Florey, somebody like the member for Mount Gambier, somebody like the member for Frome would have been elected, I would posit, under an optional preferential voting system. Somebody like Janine Haynes, who was the leader of the Australian Democrats, who was significantly popular in the community, never stood a chance in that election because of the compulsory preferential system, because I think it was Gordon Bilney at the time, the member for Ghana might remind me, I'm pretty sure he knows him. It was the member for Kingston, and Janine Haynes was the candidate, and the Liberal Party had a candidate, and the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, to my recollection, decided to swap preferences and shut out the Australian Democrats leader from having a hope of getting elected to that seat. I would posit that the Australian people, the people of Kingston in that election, were they given the opportunity of optional preferential voting, potentially may have even given Janine Haynes a better chance. But the system defended by the member for Ghana, allegedly to support independence, and I think that the member for Florey, underestimating her own popularity in her community of Florey, those independents would not benefit by the compulsory preferential system. They would indeed have benefited by an optional preferential system. But you know what? That's not even my argument either. My argument comes back to principle. How can we best give the voter the opportunity to express their will at the ballot box and thereby have this parliament reflect the people who the community in South Australia want to be here? The bill does other things that I believe are also worthy of support. And one of the principles in the bill is to ensure that it's to simplify the pre-polling arrangements. These also are arrangements, if the bill is supported, will assist in ensuring that the will of the community is best reflected in the ballot box outcomes, because they remove the current state of affairs where the Electoral Commissioner is encouraged to encourage votes at polling booth on polling day, and indeed there's a range of other things that put a barrier to pre-poll voting, the requirement that you have to declare that you're unable to vote on polling day and so forth, is not something that I think should be necessary. Because so long as every member who is a citizen in our country can vote, and vote only once, then I think that is the key point that we are seeking to achieve. Now, voting during the period of voting, we are seeing in the United States right now an opportunity for the use of pre-poll voting, indeed, and postal voting, to benefit the capacity of that country to have an election during a pandemic. It needn't be a pandemic for people to be inconvenienced by having to vote on polling day, inconvenienced to the point where some of them miss out on voting, or do have to run in and rush out and make very difficult decisions in relation to whether it's childcare or employment arrangements or anything else. And if our purpose is to have a system that best identifies the will of the community, the will of our voters and how they express themselves at the ballot box, then surely a system that makes it easy for people to vote, that makes it easy for them to have their vote registered and counted, is the one that we should be supporting. And so I think these improvements to the pre-poll voting system do just that and should therefore be commended. This bill does another significant thing which is extraordinarily welcomed in my community and I think communities around Australia, and that is it proposes to ban the use of the corflute posters on our Sobe polls. Now, this is, for people who have observed elections in other states, it's a strangely South Australian thing, the extraordinary number of these posters that appear throughout our community. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. Some candidates, I know the former member for Croydon, Michael Atkinson, indeed revelled in the idea that he would only put corflute posters on private property. He didn't think that it was necessary for his vote in the seat of Croydon to put corflute posters. And, you know, he had some entertaining speeches in this parliament talking about this. The seat of Croydon is not traditionally one that has been on the knife edge of the margin in choosing elections. And I would put that usually in marginal seats, usually in seats where people are having a crack, 3 posters on a Stobie poll is not an uncommon sight. It's an unsightly common occurrence, but not an uncommon sight. It's a tremendous distraction, I think, from what we should be focused on. It encourages the superficial side of elections, and yet political parties, while they are encouraged to do so by the fact that they are allowed, by the fact that everyone else is doing so, you end up with this situation where a candidate who does not put posters up is seen to not be trying, and so therefore just to be demonstrating to their community that they are trying as they go around introducing themselves, they are therefore encouraged to put up these ridiculous amounts of posters. A better way, I would posit, to be known in your community is to be engaged in your community. A better way for elections to be focused is to be focused on talking about issues by using the opportunity to visit community groups, by using the opportunity to potentially distribute materials that are focused on the policy directions that you wish to take as a candidate or a party, rather than having these posters which traditionally have a name, a face, a political party, to drum in that soft support, to drum in that idea that you're around the place and to familiarise yourself with the electorate. The wastage in environmental terms is monumental. The annoyance for our community is significant, and I certainly welcome and commend the Attorney-General for bringing to this Parliament a bill that will remove the use of corflute posters from future state elections on the Stobie polls. Now, there's still the capacity to express people's support in their residences and businesses and so forth in other ways. But I think that anybody who wants to spend some time talking to their community about whether this measure is something that should be endorsed or not, I would encourage them to do so if they're in any doubt about supporting this bill. I note the claim by an earlier speaker that this was a suggestion that we're looking to rig elections. I fail to see any logic in that claim. And I think that the community will certainly welcome this move. So I endorse this bill to the House. I commend the bill to the House. I encourage all members to vote for it in its current form, and I'll certainly be doing so. And I look forward to the continuance of the debate.